you're giving me a house that is over in Decatur, comparing it to a house that's right off of Piedmont Park. You're going to be paying at least 1.5 million for the Piedmont Park house, even though it's the same house.
Welcome everyone to the Closing Table Podcast, real accounts from real estate professionals, brought to you by WindowStill. I'm your host, Kat Schooler, and today I'm sitting down with real estate agent Lindsey Treadaway in Atlanta, Georgia with LT Premier. And we talk all things Atlanta real estate. Today, Lindsey and I talk about her history in design and how she's transferred those skills into her real estate business. We talk about the Atlanta market and how Lindsey navigates the unique aspects of Atlanta's real estate, both with her local and relocation clients. And then we talk about how the current real estate market is being portrayed in the media and the importance of getting to the truth of the matter by talking to a trusted agent. So without further ado, let's chat with Lindsey. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me today. I'd love to start out with how you got started in real estate.
Yeah, so this is one of my more interesting questions that I answer with my clients whenever we're doing consults. And I actually have a very robust career in design and interior design. So I started many years ago working in the interior space with interior management. And after about a decade of that, I switched to apparel sales and apparel design. And I just found that tons of my home clients were still reaching back out to me, and they were asking me to troubleshoot issues that really could only be troubleshot or troubleshooted by changing properties and changing positions. So it really was a natural transition from the design aspect of the business into the sales aspect of the business, because sometimes there's just only so much that you can work with your pre-existing space. And sometimes you just got to move up, move out, change up your scenery.
For sure. And I love like the design aspects of homes. And so I'm sure that was really like fun for you to kind of just go into this kind of greater arena of homes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, like I'm a big fan of remodeling and getting your hands in. And even as a realtor within this side of the business, I'm often looking at spaces for what they could be rather than what they are in that moment. And I think that's why a lot of clients come to me, is to kind of blend their vision with what's possible. And so getting to be on the other end of it has been really exciting.
Yeah, and I'm sure you help your clients kind of see the possibilities. In Atlanta, there's a lot of history and maybe a lot of older homes that maybe need some work.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you can really help them see what a home can be.
No, absolutely. And I think that that is something that's really special about the Atlanta market, is you're not just buying a house, you're buying a piece of history because of the age of our city and the way that our neighborhoods developed and changed throughout the ages and eras. So I think honestly with my clients, especially with my first time home buyers, that is one of the first initial hurdles we have to get over, is when you see all of these photos online of spaces and then you get in, you're like, well, it's a 120-year-old house. Like, you have a lot of opportunity to make it your own. And it's just really special to see the way that people over a century have made these homes their own.
Yeah. I'd like to get your take on Atlanta styles for a minute, because I lived in Atlanta for about 5 years, and I think it's so interesting that you do have these like beautiful historic homes, on hills, and they're huge, especially like anything along like, in Buckhead and things like that. And then there's also a pretty predominant like architectural style in Atlanta of like really modern homes, like snuggled in with all these really historic homes. And I'm kind of just interested in your take on that trend.
Yeah. So what I see is a really strong appetite for both. And what I see is also a really not strong appetite for what's currently being developed, which is brutalist architecture. And that's going to be all those flat facades, those really modular homes that we're seeing. I think anywhere that anybody loves, I love for them. So I live in a neighborhood, I live in a historic neighborhood where we've got just a really lovely amalgamation of different architectural styles. We've got a school in our neighborhood that's celebrating its 95th birthday this year. And we've got homes that really reflect that similar era of design and build. And what a lot of people don't know is because of a property records or a property records fire, an archives fire in 1920 in Atlanta, you'll see a lot of homes dated until 1920, but because all of the records burned, it is feasible to believe that a lot of the homes in some of these historic neighborhoods were built prior to that. And we only can date them to 1920 just because that's when we redid the archives. So I think for me, when you see these really established neighborhoods that have just history in them and we have a modern home pop up, it can go one of two ways. Like the neighborhood can be really excited about seeing something new, or it could definitely be something where the developer or the homeowner struggles with selling it because it just doesn't transition into the neighborhood. So I think on a case by case basis, when it comes to developing and designing those, you kind of have to have your finger on the pulse of the neighborhood. And like when I'm speaking to my clients, there is one specific house, and I use my neighborhood as an example just because of all the different kinds of architecture. We have modern homes and they're gorgeous. We have historic homes. We have like those Sears built homes. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Sears homes.
Yeah, a little bit.
Where, yeah. We can get into that, but it's just like people would do DIY homes. They'd order the parts from their homes and they'd put it together. So we just have a bunch of different kinds of architecture. And then there was this one house in my neighborhood that really didn't capture the character of any part of design. And I think that is where I think people get over a barrel when they're trying to please too many people with their design perspectives instead of honing in on a design. So whether it comes to modern or historic, I'm neither here nor there. But when it's like you've walked the neighborhood and you haven't taken into consideration the fact that like every single door in this neighborhood is different. Every single one of these homes has a non-traditional style of window, so octagon or circle, something that is other than just a traditional square. And you build this home it doesn't fit any design perspective. I think that's where Atlanta kind of gives some pushback, which is also why I think we're seeing a lot of pushback with our brutalist architecture right now, because our neighborhoods have so much character and there's not a lot of character in what's being produced.
Yeah. I love that. Oh, thank you. I've always thought it was quirky to see these kind of modern homes in these historic neighborhoods, but I think they're so unapologetic, like you're saying, they're so fully what they are. Um and they stand out.
They do, yeah. So there's one at the end of my street, and I watched it through the pandemic being built. Like, I watched this house come to fruition for about 2 years. And at the same time, a historic house right next to it was renovating. And I just kind of made this scenario up in my head. I don't even know if it's true. But it's like, I felt like they were having permit wars because of the fact that like they were both building, they were both developing, and they were just such a conflict. And I'm like, watching as a spectator, I'm like, ooh, that's an encroachment. Who's going to stop them from doing that now? And it's just like you see these houses come up, and now that they're both finished, I'm like, oh gosh, they're beautiful. And I kind of love it's like the Barbie meme. I don't know if you saw where they have like the Oppenheimer house and then like the Malibu Barbie house. That's kind of like what these modern houses feel like in these historic neighborhoods. And when they're done really well, it's really exciting to see.
Totally. Okay, so I'd love to talk about now you working with clients. When you're sitting down with someone for the first time, whether they're buying or selling with you, what does that meeting look like? What are you going over with them?
Yeah, so I think I'm a big fan of letting people talk in those initial consults until they have nothing else to say. Because the first few minutes of those consults, it's almost like they're so prepared that they tell you what they want for their situation to be, what they want to hear. And then when you start asking questions and you can kind of delayer those onions or artichokes, I find out so much more based off of what they don't say than what they tell me. So my initial consults, like I've got about 10 questions that every client or prospect must answer so that we can see where they are in their home buying process. But then other than that, I love to hear about how people are living their daily lives. I love to hear about their lifestyles because a home should be a solution for one of those challenges, and a home shouldn't be an added challenge. So, a great example is I have clients that come to me all the time because Atlanta is a big city. And so I'm from Miami, and it really is such an interesting concept for me how people here want the intersection of public transit. They want the intersection of a big city. A lot of people here say Atlanta is the New York of the South, and then they want land. And I'm like, how? I how do you do that? I would love for them to explain to me how you can have public transit, a walkable city, a very developed city with a lot of density, and then every house to have a plot of land. So we've got to delayer that and kind of work together to figure out where their priorities are. So I love hearing their perspectives about what their day-to-day life looks like, what their needs are, what their wants are. And I feel like everybody comes to me and they're like, I want a big backyard. And I'm like, okay, sure, let's put that on the list, but let's also look at like what your day-to-day life is like. Your commute's an hour and a half both ways, because that's really normal for Atlanta. So we know we're spending X amount of time outside of our house. We know that we have these responsibilities. We're joining like social networks, kickball leagues. Kickball is a huge thing in Atlanta. Um, all of these additional layers for excitement. And then you have to ask the question of like, is the maintenance of what you're asking for worth removing one or two pieces of your lifestyle? And if it is, let's go all in. Let's find it. But if it's not, like, let's push pause and see what's really important to us. So for me, with my consults, it's a lot more about figuring out how we can make housing fit the lifestyle rather than the lifestyle fit the housing.
Totally. And Atlanta, when I was there, they were really trying to beef up public transportation. But, I tell people who are in other cities, I was like, it's not like New York. You still need a car.
Yes.
Um, but, I know Atlanta is trying to develop in certain things. There's the Beltline and trying to develop all of that retail around there and kind of have a slice of that. Like there's pockets of it. And so that's where I think someone like you can come in and be really creative and be like, well, you can have a pocket of it. It's not all going to be like that. But you could, live somewhere where you can walk the Beltline and then like go get a margarita and then go to the skate park and.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like, do we want a backyard because we want to garden that backyard? Or do we want a backyard because we want to see greenery among all of the buildings? And if that's the case, why don't we live off of Piedmont Park? Because then you have the biggest backyard that you don't have to maintain. And there's plenty
Yeah,
of trees there. But if somebody's like, I really want to be an urban farmer, I'm like, okay, well, then a condo is likely not a great fit.
for
So,
sure.
yeah, and I think it's really interesting moving to Atlanta. So I moved to Atlanta from Miami about 10 years ago. So based off of Atlanta terms, been here for over a decade and people are like, oh, you're pretty much a native. Um, but I still feel like I'm learning something new about Atlanta every day. And I I have different eyes for Atlanta than I think somebody that is a true native that's born and raised in Atlanta, which is far and few between because Atlanta is such a transient city because of our corporations we have here. I find Atlanta to be more comparable to like an LA or a Miami just because of the way that our highway system is. So I think it's interesting to kind of break that down with clients and be like, you really want walkable. So like, let's look at what's walkable within your potential neighborhoods rather than thinking we're going to get like 3 miles on foot.
Yeah, for sure. Do you find because, Atlanta has the international airport, there's actually a big like international community. When we were with lived there, my husband worked with a guy who was from England and just all these sorts of people. Do you find you're working with a lot of relocation clients?
Yes. So I do work on the buy side a lot with people that are new to Atlanta, which I love because while I've lived here for a while, I'm not so far removed from the feeling of being like, where am I and how do I navigate this city? And for me, that's really, really exciting. But I mean, Atlanta, I feel like Atlanta's always in the news. We have one of the highest concentrations of Fortune 500 companies. We have the international airport. We have multiple international universities. Like, I was just going through last night and I was like, how many universities do we have in Atlanta city limits or in the Atlanta metro? Um, so I do work a lot with people that are transplants to Atlanta, whether they intend to stay here long term or they intend to stay here to the end of their contract. And I always feel very excited to show people the city, especially if they've not been here, if they're not super acclimated to it, because I just feel like you can learn something new about the city and go somewhere new every single day, which is really exciting.
What are some of your favorite places to point out to people?
Oh my gosh, I kind of tailor it to what their interests are, but you already hit on one, the Beltline. Everybody loves the Beltline. Um, what I think is really interesting for me though is seeing the neighborhoods where you'll have the small family business, the mom and pop store with the apartment above it where people live. Like we have a lot of that in Atlanta. One of my favorite places in Atlanta that's like that is Juliana's Crepes, which is in Inman Park. But there are just a ton of truly small businesses here. And I think for me, that's what I love to showcase to people that are new to Atlanta or new to their neighborhood is finding out the community that they can support where they intend to live.
Yeah, and in all those different parks, all of the festivals. Oh, when I lived there, it was like every weekend you could go to some sort of festival, starting in like April to like almost November, really.
No, and it's like we definitely have something new every month. I feel like there's festivals that have been kind of like quiet neighborhood festivals, like the Grant Park Shade Festival. I think they've been doing it for a while, but this year, because of the Beltline and all of the neighborhoods getting a little bit more connected, the Grant Park Shade Festival was like massive. It was like it was something that I've never seen for that neighborhood, and I'm really excited because then you get to see people utilizing their gorgeous porches. Are you familiar with Grant Park?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like I've never seen so many people on their front porch as that festival. And it's like, oh my gosh, like you guys, perfect use of the space because these porches are like wraparound porches. And so you just get to see people enjoying their neighborhood and neighbors being neighbors. So all of the festivals are really, really exciting. And I think a new thing, and I'm saying urban farming because I've had multiple requests for urban farming spaces lately, but we're having so many farmers markets pop up. Like there's one in my neighborhood that is starting in September, and I'm so excited for it. Um, so there's really always a way to get outside and always a way to support and build community in Atlanta.
Yeah. I lived in Smyrna and there was a little farmers market that would pop up on the weekends in one of the church parking lots and it was great. You get some real deal Georgia peaches.
Yeah.
Lindsay, going back to your clients, do you have any memorable client stories you'd like to share with us?
Oh my gosh. I have so many. And it depends on the kinds that you want to hear. Um, one of my so this happened, oh golly, this happened in like the first year that I was working in real estate. And everybody talks about how you kind of find yourselves in these really unique positions because you're entering people's homes and it's just, it's an intimate, safe space for people. And me coming from a design background, I'm like, yeah, I know I've been in like plenty of people's houses. I get it, guys. But I was showing a client properties and I had confirmed with the listing agent the appointment time multiple times. And I think that's something that clients don't necessarily know that we as agents do, but we're in constant communication with our colleagues and counterparts when we're trying to create these experiences for people when they see a property for the first time. So I've confirmed with this listing agent like it feels like to me a million times, probably in reality like four times. Like we're showing up at this time, is that okay? I see that it's still occupied, is that okay? Have you checked with the owner? Like I just want to make sure everything's squared away. So we get the full-blown go ahead. So I'm finagling with the keys and I hear some ruckus and I'm like, oh, I think that they have a dog, so we've got to be careful. I look at my client, I'm like, make sure we shut the door behind us really quickly. They have a pet inside. And we enter. So we're standing in the entryway and we're like, oh my gosh, this space is gorgeous. Oh, I love this. I love that. And all of a sudden, that noise that I heard before I walked into the property gets louder and louder. So my client, because I'm not trying to blow our cover or have a negative experience whatsoever, they're off like just oohing and awing over the property. And I'm like Veronica Mars, like, where is that sound coming from? The sound is coming from because the bathroom, the owner was taking a shower and doing a whole, like, I don't know, song and dance number in the shower. I'm like, this person is in the buff, in the bathroom, making so much noise. I've confirmed a million times that they're not going to be here. Like, wow. So I'm trying to sequester my client out and be like, okay, like the homeowner's still inside. We don't want to spook them because if we spook them and they don't know that we're here, instinctually they're going to run out and see what's going on. They're completely in the buff and soaking wet because they're in the shower. Like, this is not the experience that I am trying to cultivate right now. We've got to leave. And so we left, like, quiet as little mice. I'm calling the listing agent and she is like, oh my gosh, I told him to leave. Like, I mean, he just has this thing where, like, he'll stay in the house during tours and I told him to leave. And I'm like, so you knew that your client, like, has a thing to stay in the house? And of course, like, of all of his quirky behaviors he could have in that moment, he is doing like a shower musical routine. Needless to say, we super passed on that property, but that was my first very memorable client moment, because you always hear about these like quirky situations happening and then you think, oh, they're not going to happen to me, and the next thing you know, I'm like, what, like, defying gravity routine is happening in the shower right now, and why is this happening to me? I'm thinking it's a dog.
Oh my. My impression would be like, I don't think this guy wants to sell his house. Like, right? Like
When
he's like
that's exactly
sabotaging.
what Yeah, that's exactly what my client said. They were like, we're just not gonna go back to this space. And I'm like, okay, 'cause, like, obviously you want to be like, well, I can reschedule. We can reschedule with the listing agent present so that we can make sure that there's no interference. And my clients are like, it's beautiful, lovely. We're set. We're good. We don't want to go back. But I
Yeah.
think that that's like, I love that you brought that up, because I think that there's a lot of nonverbal cues people give in transactions that indicate their levels of motivation. And I definitely think that that is one of those nonverbal cues of somebody always being present and kind of really involved in the process. There are some times and reasons when that would be appropriate, but in the vast majority of transactions, that is not appropriate. So when people do that, or they have other interesting behaviors, it does send up that little red flag, at least in my mind, where I'm like, ooh, this is going to be a hard one to close. This is going to be a hard offer for us, because I'm not feeling a lot of motivation. I want to know what their motivation is for even participating in the real estate market right now would be.
Yeah, totally. Lindsey, what would you say is one of the biggest lessons you've learned in real estate?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think for me, the transition, like I've touched on, where I'm like, I'm going from housing to housing. Um, how nimble I think real estate agents have to be. And there are aspects of the business on my end where I'm like planning to a T. And I think the more nimble that agents can be, the better client experience their clients have. So it's one of those true learning lessons and learning curves for about the first 6 months for me, where I was like, I just need to be prepared. I need to take a step back. I need to offer a client-led experience for what their expectations are. And I need to be ready to like bob and weave and dodge whatever situation comes at me. So I would say flexibility is, it means something different in every industry, but for real estate, I think it means something incredibly different. Just because you are dealing with people's safe spaces and homes and privacy, and you're running on other people's time.
Yeah, I could see how if you are more of like a planning type personality, that might be difficult to navigate the aspects of this business where things are just constantly popping up. People are randomly reaching out to you, or suddenly, something needs to happen. The appraisal says this, or a lender needs that, and then, you kind of have to drop everything and take care of the fire.
No, yeah, exactly. And I think getting your sea legs around that as quickly as possible is very, very helpful, because you can't bend the laws of math and you can't create more time. So just being able to be responsive instead of reactive to the situations in which you are presented is so helpful, because it really is. It moves at such a fast pace. It is unlike any other industry that I've ever worked in, even tangentially. And I think for somebody like me, that's really exciting because I love being able to have a new day every day.
Is there something like a lesson or a trick you found in navigating kind of when people suddenly are kind of vying for your attention, or a task just jumps up even though you're maybe in the middle of something else? Like, how have you handled kind of the task switching and handled like navigating whether it's something is actually an emergency, someone might be saying it is but it's not?
Yeah, I think a lot of that discernment comes with experience. And you have to remember too, every situation is an emergency for every client because they don't do this every single day and we do. So being able to force rank those priorities about how you're going to handle things. And for me, the biggest unlock is so simple, but it's keeping people aware, keeping people in the loop. So if something comes across my email or my text message or a phone call and it feels really emergent based off of the way somebody is presenting information, the first thing I want to do is give them a deadline for when I will respond to them and let them know like it could be by end of day, or just walk them through the decision making process, because I feel like that situation happens multiple times during every transaction, and something like that happens every day where somebody is like, this feels like hair's on fire, and it's like, oh, I've heard this song and dance before, but for you this is your first time in this rodeo. Just to give you a breakdown, I have to talk to this person, I have to talk to this person, I have to talk to this person. And I know based off of their daily schedules, because I work with these people in these industries regularly, we are likely to not have a solid answer for 24 or 48 hours. So depending on the situation, walk them through all of the decision makers and then give them a deadline for when you're going to be in touch. And sometimes that deadline comes and you still don't have an answer, but at least they know what the process is. And for me, that is like the number one piece of feedback I get from my clients, is that they feel so informed about the process, where they didn't really understand previously that there were all of these elements involved with negotiating real estate and buying real estate and selling real estate. And so if you just demystify what goes on behind the scenes, I know that some people think like white glove service is taking out all of the stressors and just presenting the success. But I don't think people are programmed like that. Like, I think white glove service for clients is truly keeping them informed and demystified. That way they know what to anticipate and they know what to expect. For me personally, if I have no idea what's going on and I don't know when it's going to be resolved, could be the smallest thing in the world, I'm still going to feel stress about it. What relieves that stress is knowing that there's an action plan in place and then there's a deadline for it to be resolved.
Certainly. And I think that's so great because it's very easy for us to kind of have like blinders to think that, oh, our, you know, you're just waiting for our call, and then the lender is just waiting for our information, and then, the other person's just waiting to sign the document, right? But people are juggling many different objects. They're, circling many plates. People have multiple things going on all of the time, and sometimes we need to be reminded.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I mean, most recently, that works with people within our industry as well. Like, there's a few interesting elements that are going on with like Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae mortgage processes right now. And what I think is one of the best parts about this industry is that you can be collaborative over competitive. And so I feel like every agent has information that another agent doesn't have. So when I encounter these kinds of situations in the wild with other agents, it's like I employ this technique with my clients and I employ it with other agents because very recently I was working on another transaction with another agent who was like, this is emergent. I need this document right now, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, have you heard this? Let me send you an article. This is what's going on. I know that you need it right now based off of processing timelines. What we've seen being able to be processed in 7 to 10 business days takes 21 to 30. And that doesn't feel great, but here's documentation for why it's taking that long. And this is what we're going to do in the meantime to process it. And so I really think that just keeping everybody in the loop and sharing knowledge is much better than keeping people in the dark and just saying, it's going to work out, I promise.
Right. Yeah, giving the proof. I love that.
Yeah.
This kind of dovetails nicely to, are there any myths you're seeing, circulating about the real estate market that you'd like to bust?
Man, I feel like there's just so many every day. Um, I would say the global myth is I feel like journalists are being incredibly unfair to the real estate industry right now because of the recent lawsuits, like the NAR lawsuit, the compensation lawsuit, all of these things going on. And I think when you put what is being published in the media on paper and you reflect it to how it is going to play out into society and reality, we have two completely disparate situations. And I have been asked questions specifically about all of the recent changes in the real estate industry. I feel like at least once or twice a day for what feels like the past year. And when you put it in plain terms, it's not as spooky as what think pieces and journalism are making it feel like right now. There's still room to participate in the market, and there's still a reason to be involved. So for me, it's like I love speaking about current events in real estate. And I also love kind of lifting the hood on that and being like, this is what they're saying. Practical application is this. And kind of bridging that gap between the two. And I know that you probably want a more direct answer, but like the NAR compensation lawsuit that we're seeing, there's just so much information that is swirling around the ethers of the internet. And I'm like, in practical application, everybody is entitled and they have always been entitled to use an agent or not use an agent and pay what they want. I mean, those are just your rights in a free market. You can do what you want with what you have and you can pay who you want for it. But breaking it down the way that it's being broken down and presenting information, we're scaring buyers. We're not being transparent with sellers. And so like bridging that gap and saying, hey, buying a home for a first time home buyer is hard enough. If you as a seller are not intending on negotiating this deal either with compensation, with credits, anything you can do to kind of get the deal done. I don't know what planet you're on, but the average first time home buyer doesn't have $75,000 liquid cash to just buy something. We're going to have some wiggle room. And I think it's also a good idea to educate buyers on the same side. It's like, if you have the right person advocating for you, all of these fees that you realize you could incur, we can work around that. There's workarounds. We can find the motivated seller. We can find the seller that's down to earth, that understands that it takes two to tango. I just think that educating people on what's going on in current events in the real estate beyond what's posted on all of these different websites and news sources is really, really important. And I could go on and on and on and on about busting those myths. But I mean, the number one thing that I think clients need to do and prospects need to do is speak with somebody in their market before they make a decision with anything. Because reading a news article doesn't actually inform you about how it can impact your specific situation.
I think that's a really fair assessment because I think we sometimes forget with journalists that they have a job to do too. They need you to click on their article, they need you to subscribe to their publication or buy their publication. You know, they have their own motivations for better or for worse. And I do think it is unfortunate in that aspect that puts a lot of it puts a lot on real estate agents to kind of then take away all the fear mongering and break it down to the truth of the matter. And and I think that's, like I said, unfortunate, but like you said, I think it's best that just people talk to agents in their market to get down to the truth.
No, absolutely. And I mean, it's definitely an added hurdle because it's no secret. Anybody that works in sales, we all grapple with the elephant of the room is that somebody is, and most people are inherently distrustful of somebody in sales. So having these additional forces kind of reinforce there's no trust aspect here anymore. But then not having that said back to them of, you have pay-per-clicks. Like, everybody's in sales. You're selling something with this headline right now, and the information that you have might be very valid and great information, but what my clients are reading are the headlines, and it sounds really woogie boogie scary. So rather than feel any sort of way or have an emotional connection to what's being published, like, just talk to somebody. Because, like, the number one thing I saw when all of this broke out were so many people that were wanting to sell, and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't have to do this anymore. I don't have to do this anymore. Yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, you never had to do those things. I encourage you to attempt what you're saying that you're going to do right now. And I also encourage you to reach out to an expert if it turns out to be unsuccessful, because what is being presented as a possibility, the average person works like 55 hours a week. It is not easy for people to sell their own houses because it's a full-time career. So just like speaking to somebody and really breaking down what those headlines mean, I think can be really helpful for everybody.
I was thinking about it in that same way the other day. My husband and I are starting our home search. We are, of course, working with an agent because we are busy people with full-time jobs. Like, I could change the oil in my car. I don't because because of multiple things. I don't have time. I don't have time to learn how to do it. I don't have time to do it. I don't have time to deal with it if I do it wrong. And that applies to so many different things in our lives. And a big one, way more than my $75 oil change, is a house, right? I don't have the time to learn real estate contracts or to just be constantly looking at houses, you know, that are hits and misses. You know, this is where when you're working with an expert, you're saving yourself time, you're saving yourself money. It's a service like anything else. And so the idea that people might think something about that relationship would be unfair is mystifying to me, because it's like this, just like anything in life, you're paying for a service.
No, truly. And then I think once we pop the hood on that and people are like, well, I don't know if it's the right choice for me. I don't know if this is the right choice for me. I don't know if it's worth the investment. Like, getting down to brass tacks, talking about the immediacy culture that we live in the accessibility culture that we live in now with social media, iPhones, like all the different ways people can contact us. Fact of the matter is, at least in Atlanta, you often have 24 hours to make a decision about something, and you have to contact, in order to make an informed decision, at least 3 or 4 people for that one decision. All of these people keep business hours as well. So if you think somebody is going, if you think that during your 8-hour workday, you're going to be able to stop what you're doing and make 4 to 5 calls, where those calls last about 20 to 40 minutes per person, to make a decision, because you might have 24 hours to make it, but you have a window of 6 to 8 hours to actually contact people to get the information you need. I encourage people to give it a shot, but I don't know how you could work your full-time job and then manage all of these added layers and still protect yourself as somebody that is participating in the market.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly well said.
Because we just have a finite amount of time, and so it's you gotta pick your ballot. You gotta pick your battles, and for some people, going their own way works for them, and I think that that's great, because any success in the market reinforces success of the market. But for the vast majority of people, it's just not reasonable.
Truly. So, Lindsey, I'd love to get your take on the current marketing trends you're seeing in real estate and what you're doing to help market your clients' properties.
Honestly, I am so excited about what's going on, at least in the Atlanta market. We could go on and on about the statistic that everybody knows, and it's like 99% of people see a property, or see the property that they end up purchasing for the first time, online. So everybody knows that you need to have a very robust social media presence. You need to have your head wrapped around what digital marketing looks like. You need to be working with the best photographers, videographers, people to make that digital marketing publication really pop whenever you launch a property. But the market is slowing. It's not like pandemic levels the way that it was, even though it's still a very busy market. So we're seeing more of these networking and face-to-face opportunities for selling, which is honestly one of my favorite ways to market a property. There, you can have the most exciting drone tour and the most exciting photos and the best staging, which I definitely recommend people to have. Please have all of those things, because if I'm not selling your property, I'm looking at your property to buy with one of my clients, and like, that kind of digital presence can make or break the showcase of a property. But what's really exciting is people are kind of getting back to these principles of connecting with clients and connecting with interested parties by showcasing what the house does for people. So, for example, there was a rooftop kind of brokers open house situation that was set during sunset hours. That was like a sunset cocktail event for the neighborhood and then for prospective buyers. And it was perfect because you had this beautiful skyline view of the city. You got to watch the sunset, and you really got to experience like that value add for living in this specific home that cannot be communicated through photos. So I think people are really kind of getting back to really showcasing a home the way that the home should be showcased, rather than just kind of throwing everything at a digital footprint.
Yeah, I love that too. Especially someone looking right now, photos, they have their limitations. Like they're the great like first impression, but ultimately limited.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, because photos, I think we've all gotten very acclimated with being in a very visual environment online, where the expectation is that your photos and your staging and your interiors are 110% perfect, because people see it so much. We've got all of these social media accounts like Historic Homes, like Zillow Gone Wild, the people that interview people about how much they pay for rent or mortgage. We're seeing houses in real time lived in with real people, and we're seeing showcase properties. We've got so many home selling, property selling TV shows. We know, and clients know whether they know it or not, what a good home looks like. So rather than being like, oh, great photography is the answer, great photography is the floor. Because if you have a bad angle of your house, if something feels off, if your toilet seat is up in your bathroom photos because you decided to take your photos yourself or you decided to work with a non-established architectural photographer, people might not be able to point out why it doesn't feel right and why that house doesn't feel like it's offering the value for what they're expecting for that investment price point. But we know, like, there's, again, nonverbal cues for getting the deals done. So again, digital marketing used to be the big unlock and the big tool that everybody was leaning on. And now I'm like, if you are doing, what is the new thing? What is the thing that everybody loves? The dusk photos. If you're doing dusk photos and you're not actually shooting them at dusk, I've seen enough of them to know that the sun doesn't set on that side of the house and that skies are not purple. Like, that is digitally enhanced. And even though it's done really, really well, clients see it too. They're like, something about this doesn't seem right. Something about the angle of those photos doesn't seem right. The room seems really small. I feel like the ceilings are really low. So rather than hitting it out of the park with perfect photos, I think you could ruin the sale of your home with not investing in digital marketing because it's just expected.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And um, we do real estate photos at WindowStill, and I see them, every day, and it makes a huge difference. And then I look on Zillow, and there is one property locally, to me that someone must have taken them themselves with a point and shoot, and they're all out of focus. And I'm like, I don't think that house will ever sell.
No, and it's like I've seen so many properties where I'm like, friends, we just need to go see it. I know what this trick is, and it is the listing agent standing on a chair in the corner of a room with a landscape orientation to their iPhone taking these photos. I know it looks a hot mess to you right now, but in person it's going to be fine. But like, if you don't have somebody that's also advocating for you seeing those things, or if you don't have somebody that's experienced enough to advocate to get around that, whereas like, you have to work with professional photographers. There is just no way around it. And I would say that that is, if you're working with an agent that offers packages for marketing and selling your homes, and there is a package where they offer to take the photos themselves, really consider what your expectations and goals are for selling your home. Because you might be reducing the investment point that you're making with that specific agent, but you're also reducing the price point that you're going to get.
Oh, that's great. Lindsey, are there any challenges you're facing in the current market, or you're seeing others face, and how are you seeing yourself or others work through them?
I would say, gosh, my number one answer for all of these kinds of inquiry questions are going to be like, talk to somebody in the market. Um, because I work with so many transient people transplants to Atlanta, at least from the buyer side, because the seller side is just, we've got two different pickles. And the buy side pickle is people love getting on TikTok and seeing how much home you can buy in any major market for X amount of dollars. And that happens in Atlanta all the time. Or people will be like, the average home price for this area is this, and this. And there are so many factors that come in to determining what the average is that when I consult with these people that are transplants to Atlanta, and they're like, well, they say that I can get X, Y, and Z for like $400,000. And I'm like, let's go look at that right now, because you're telling me that you want areas 1 through 5. You want single family detached, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and you want the ability to be able to subdivide your plot of land and develop an ADU in the backyard. But you want to pay $400,000. So let's go check it out. Because like in the business world, and I say this all the time, there's the triangle of good, fast, cheap. You can get something good and you can get something fast, but it's not going to be cheap. You can get something fast, you can get something cheap, and it's likely not going to be good. In Atlanta, and I think in probably every market, there's the intersection of price, condition, and location. So people hear these average price points, and I'm like, we need to really reinvestigate what our expectations are, because if you're telling me that you are pre-approved for X amount, but you saw on TikTok you can get something for this amount, I really would love for you to go online and use Google Maps and see what your work commute is going to be like whenever you're looking in that investment tolerance, and see what we can give and take. But I feel like just the misinformation of like the average or what to expect versus what the reality is. I mean, a lot of these averages that people are coming to me with, I'm like, Atlanta is a dense city, and you're telling me you want to live in Midtown and you want a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom, single family detached house, and the average home in Midtown is $400,000. We've got like at least 15 massive condo buildings. So you're looking at the averages that include condos. You're not looking at the averages that are going to include single family homes. And when we get there, it's going to be $2 million at minimum. So getting that tailored search and that tailored information, I feel like, is something that people are always working around, because Atlanta's a hot market. It's like, depending on who you ask, the number 1 or number 2 place that people are moving right now. And so there's a lot of tools available for people online to make those decisions, but there is no tool like talking to somebody.
I think that's a great answer, especially, I think I've talked to other agents about this. Like, we have so much information out there that anyone can get, with the internet and social media and things like that. And it's such a gift and a curse, because averages are averages, because they have a lot of information, a lot of different factors, townhomes, condominiums, things like that might be included, you know, in that pricing average. And I think it's so interesting that you brought up the good, fast and cheap things. My husband's an engineer, and we were just talking about that in terms of engineering. It applies to so many industries, and just like I'm looking in my kind of hometown, and like something that I've had to be very realistic with myself about is that people have not updated their homes in the place that I want to live. And so everybody's like kitchen is like from the 80s or the 90s, and that's just that's the reality of where we're looking. And Atlanta, it might be something else specifically, but in different pockets you get different things.
No, absolutely. That is 1000% one of the things that happens in some of these pockets in Atlanta. I would say where I think that the development and hustle and bustle of Atlanta is really similar to something like, LA, Miami, Dallas, something like that. I think the hyper specific styles of properties is really similar to New York. So yeah, there are some people that come to me and I have had a client show me one house that was a Sears house. So like Sears, Atlanta used to have the Sears Roebuck distribution center here, and they would sell like almost like gingerbread style houses. You'd get all of the pieces and you'd put them together, and boom, you'd have this like fabulous house for that time frame. So we have a ton of houses in Atlanta that are Sears Roebuck DIY houses. And I have a client that has brought me one house that is quite literally the exact same as another house, because it's a Sears house from like the 1930s and 1940s. And they're upset because of the price disparity between the two. And I'm like, there's nothing I can do about the fact that you're looking at one house that's $450,000 from the same era. There have been certain updates, but then this other house is right off of Piedmont Park. Like, it's the same house. Condition, give or take a few. There's been updates made to both of them, but different quality of updates. But what you're paying for is the location. There's a house, you're giving me a house that is over in Decatur, which is a neighborhood, another city of Atlanta, comparing it to a house that's right off of Piedmont Park. You're going to be paying at least $1.5 million for the Piedmont Park house, even though it's the same house. And so I think that like educating people with that, because it's just so neighborhood specific what you're going to see. And it's like in my neighborhood, it's a historic neighborhood. It's definitely a legacy owner neighborhood where people bought the homes to build their families, lived in them their whole lives, and now their families are inheriting them or they're downsizing, but they've lived in these houses for like 30, 40, sometimes 50 years. And when your home becomes your home, a lot of people don't take into consideration design trends. So for my neighborhood specifically, we're looking at a lot of like laminate and Formica kitchens and a lot of like white appliances in some homes. And people are like, for the investment point of these specific neighborhoods, like you would imagine for it to be completely turnkey. And I'm like, what you're paying for is the location. And you're getting based off of the average price point for a house in this neighborhood, you're getting a discount because of the fact that it's not updated. But I think that that's something that homeowners don't consider is design happens in phases, and you can still be on trend 1 to 2 phases of design behind. But if you're somebody that, like my neighbors, have lived in their house since the 1970s and you've never updated anything because it works for you, I love that. When you go to sell, you're taking a hit because it's not just a little dated, it's very far behind, and people can identify that. But I think
Yeah.
that's normal. Like Atlanta's a historic city. You're going to have some really big wins with a lot of these houses, but looking for a house that's 100% is always going to lead to disappointment.
Yeah, I think people kind of underestimate like how comfortable other people get in their homes. Like they're not waking up every morning and being like, God, that Formica, God, the laminate. They're just like, that's my kitchen. I'm making coffee now, you know?
Yeah, they don't look at it that way. They're like, that's my kitchen, and that's where my kids took their first steps back in 1982. This stain is where my daughter was in high school and painting her nails, and she got the polish on it, and then the acetone ate through the seal. Like they look at it and they're like, this is my home. This is where I've made my memories. This is my life. And then as a buyer, you come in and you're like, what? Like I've not seen a butcher's block original countertop maybe ever in my life. So I think it's just kind of, it's interesting to see that. I think it's interesting to see that. And I love when people feel at home, but I also know that like navigating those conversations with both parties leads to some aha moments for everyone.
Lindsay, did you make any goals for this year? And if so, would you like to share with us how they're going?
Oh my gosh. I am one of those people. So the first brokerage I worked at, we did what do you call those things? There's people love them and I am perplexed by them, but I see that they have value. Vision boards. Perfect. Um and I find that I work in a very relationship oriented career because it is suits my personality so well. So when I make goals, I definitely make business goals, but a lot of them revolve around my controllables. So like referrals, how much I'm going to put into marketing for managing my own marketing for my brand. Like not how much I'm going to spend on housing marketing, but how much I'm going to spend on marketing myself, the way that I'm going to outreach to people, what causes I'm going to support with my business. Like I am heavily involved with the arts and animal adoption community in Atlanta. So I'm like, how many dogs am I going to help get adopted this year through my business? Um, but a lot of my goals are really focused back on to my life and being able to balance my career with my level of enjoyment with my personal life. So I don't know if I would be very helpful with sharing goals because it's like very mathematically driven. So I've got my P&L sheets, balancing in those every month, and I'm making sure that we're meeting our sales goals. But the vast majority of my goals are like I want to travel outside of the country for 2 times a year. I want to be off by 2 o'clock on Mondays and Tuesdays to be able to spend more time with my son. Um, Things like that. Things like where I can buy back time to really enjoy my life.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you're looking forward to now that we are in like the last part of the year? It doesn't have to be anything real estate related.
Yeah, I'm one of those interesting agents where the vast majority of people I know do tons of business because the busiest time for the market is April through August, right? We've got those summer shoppers. And I do business during that time frame, but I do the vast majority of my business in October, November, and December. And I think I'm the only person that I know in my market that really like Q4 queen. Like I'm a Q4 warrior. So right now I am looking for that pipeline to flush out, getting those properties ready to be listed, um, getting some really exciting marketing going for those clients. But I think I'm enjoying the build up to that because this is also like September is the time when I take my vacation because I know that there's laps in my schedule. Um, so I'm just enjoying the ease into what would be the busiest part of my year.
Ooh, well, that's so exciting. I'm excited for you to ramp up.
I know, thank you. Yeah, I don't know how that's happened. It's just that's just kind of always been what my luck is. Like I'm like buyers, we have a buying schedule and we want to make the best equity that we can in our home during this time frame. So we're going to look for deals in this time frame. Sellers, we're going to maximize our profits and maximize our returns. And so we're going to sell in this time frame and just kind of getting my pipeline on a schedule rather than just like entering the market to enter the market, which sometimes you have to do. But if you can have some strategy to it, you should look into doing that.
Very cool. Well, Lindsey, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to tell people how they can find you and work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. All of my contact information is on my social media profile. Lindsey Treadaway, Premier, Primier. You can contact me through Instagram, social media. My work number is up there as well as my email. So just find me online.
Awesome. And we'll link it below so everyone can find it with a quick click. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Closing Table podcast brought to you by WindowStill. I'm Kat Schooler. Please be sure you are following our podcast on Apple or Spotify. And if you're part of our YouTube audience, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're enjoying this podcast, please feel free to leave us a comment or review. It helps us find more amazing listeners like you. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.